It's not even been 24 hours since the Borderlands 4 trailer, and there is big drama. We're going to get into all of that in this video, but before we do, be sure to sub to the channel. It's my dream to hit 60k before the end of this year, so hopefully you can help me achieve it. And also, if you're interested in any news regarding Borderlands 4, this is the #1 spot to get it, so make sure you're along for the ride. So, Borderlands 4 had its trailer last night at the Game Awards, and overall, it's safe to say that everybody's mindset is, we're so back. However, there's one thing that everybody seems to unanimously agree on, which feels like it's a once in a blue moon event for the Borderlands community, and that's the Vault Hunter designs. Now, as the trailer was playing last night, it looked very cool, very exciting, but there was one frame where I think everybody collectively scratched their heads, and it was this one right here. It was a shot of characters, and it's almost weird, in my experience at least, when this shot hit the screen, I knew it was the Vault Hunters, but it didn't click in my head that it was for a couple of seconds. Which is weird because it really should, right? I mean, you could tell that this was the case in Borderlands 3 when they showed the Vault Hunters mostly, but here, they just look like normal NPCs. Before we go any further, I have to be the bearer of bad news here. The reality is, at this point in the game's life cycle, before it's even come out, yes, there is a life cycle because they are actively working on it, something like the design of these characters is basically not going to change. I would be very shocked if it changed, and it's important that regardless of what side of the fence you're on with this argument, you agree with me, because there are so many factors preventing these from changing drastically to appease the fans at this point. The #1 reason why is cosmetics. They make tons and tons and tons of cosmetics in these games for these new characters, and a lot of them are variations of the heads, or they are costumes. Sometimes they did those in Borderlands 3, and I'll show you an example of that right now. To put an eye patch on Moze, they don't just give Moze an eye patch, they actually make a second Moze head that they swap out when you put the eye patch cosmetic on. The reason for this is because for physics, it's a lot easier to keep things constrained this way, and it's also just cheaper on resources and less bug potential. It's much easier to just swap out to a new skeletal mesh than it is to add an additional one on top of a skin that could then lead to clipping issues, etc, etc. So, very important that we all understand before we go any further that the chances of these designs changing is very slim. This isn't a Sonic movie situation where they can change his one model and then probably change it throughout the entirety of the film. I'm not saying it was easy to change Sonic's model, but the point is that the chance of these models changing is practically near impossible at this point. I'd be extremely shocked if that happened. If it does, that's great, but anyway, let's move on, I've rambled enough. So I just kind of want to jump into the complaints here, because I don't have much else to say. I think if we're going to talk about these Vault Hunter designs, the best way to move past this issue is to address it head on. So I'll just say it outright, I'll give my thoughts on it and then go through some things which I've seen the community saying. So, my biggest problem with these Vault Hunters right off the bat is that they look very, let's say, unnamed. They look unnamed. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if I lined up for you the Vault Hunters from Borderlands 3 and the Vault Hunters from Borderlands 4, if I asked you to give me a name for each of these, which ones do you think you can name the quickest? Because for me, it would be the Borderlands 3 Vault Hunters. And similarly, if I got the Borderlands 2 Vault Hunters, do you think you'd name those faster, or the Borderlands 4 ones faster? And I'm not asking you which ones you recognize, I'm saying that if you had to come up with names, actual names for these people, and what they did, who would you pick? Now, on the subject of who would you pick on what they actually do, I do want to also defend these Vault Hunters, because the one thing I've seen people saying is that you can't tell just by looking at them what they do, but I think this is a really horrible argument, and I don't think people understand it, and I'm even going to turn this into a little bit of a versus Borderlands 2, just for the good old nostalgia. For example, if I showed you this picture of Salvador from the trailer as if he just showed up, much like the Borderlands 4 Vault Hunters did, and I asked you, what do you think Salvador does? He's standing here, right? Not doing much. What does Salvador do in this game? Right? I mean, that seems to be one of the biggest complaints. I've seen that with the Borderlands 4 Vault Hunters. What does Salvador do based on this shot? If this was your first time seeing Salvador, what does he do? And similarly with Zero, I would ask you, what does Zero do? Right? If I showed you Zero in this shot here, I'd ask you, well, what does he do? Now, I'm not saying that you can't identify what they do based on other trailers they release. What I'm asking you here is to take a look at these shots which I'm showing you and ask yourself, if there's no showcase of their action skill, could you truly in your unbiased way, tell me what these characters do? Now, I know that's going to upset some people, and I'm going to get a bunch of people angry at me in the comments, but just hold on. Because I'm not just saying this is the be-all end-all of the argument. I do still agree that these designs are not it. And the reason why is because while you can't really make the argument of, wow, I can't tell what they do, because that can apply to literally any Vault Hunter the first time you see them, unless Salvador's first interaction is him spinning 2 guns on top of his head. What I will say is that these characters don't look distinct. Each one of them just looks like they were made in a character creator. In fact, my first reaction when I saw the Siren from the trailer was, is that Mose? Because she looked so similar to Mose, which I thought was really odd. She looked so similar to a character we've already seen, and it's odd that we've come to that conclusion so quick. A lot of people, of course, thought it was Ava, and the lady on the right, well, she's just not really getting any mentions at all right now because of how bland she looks. Now, it's really bizarre to me because Gearbox are capable of making very distinct and almost unmissable Vault Hunters. Granted, what I said about the argument of not being able to tell what they do not really working, I will say that in most cases when you look at a Vault Hunter, you can tell what Vault Hunter they are very quickly. Now, this could be because of identity. We are, used to seeing the Vault Hunters we're referencing here. We've played a ton of Borderlands 3, we've played a bunch of Borderlands 2 and 1 and pre-sequel, so we're used to those Vault Hunters, so maybe we are inherently biased here. But all in all, what's important to note right now, and what's important to bring up, is that players don't seem to want to get to know these Vault Hunters, which is really worrying for Gearbox, because the Vault Hunters are like the center of the game. But I want to point out some things which I think might contribute to why these Vault Hunters look so bland. The first one I'll draw attention to is Big Guy. Everybody knows who Big Guy is because he's the only big guy in this picture. I think the biggest problem I'm seeing with this guy right now is the lack of definition. One of my complaints in Borderlands 3 was that the black lines on their textures were a little too overdone. However, what's interesting is that in Borderlands 4, they seem to be toning back on this. Especially on the body and on the fingers and on the face, this guy just looks like he's more plasticky, made of clay. A lot of things I've seen people saying is that these Vault Hunters don't look real. They look like action figures, bobbleheads, they don't look like they're in this world. It looks like you've taken an Overwatch character and placed them in this world. I will say that I do think if you were to ask me who I think the most unique character in the lineup is, it would be the Siren. I actually do think that if you were to replace the Siren with 3 other more unique looking Vault Hunters, she would stand out one of the more. I think another reason though that these Vault Hunters look so auraless, which I haven't seen people bring up, is their clothing, right? Like, the guy on the left is wearing civilian clothing. The lady on the right is wearing civilian clothing. And let me be clear, I mean by Borderlands standards, right? Even the Siren, she's wearing civilian clothing. None of these characters really, apart from the big guy, look like Vault Hunters. They look like the Suicide Squad, right? They don't look like they are in this to hunt vaults. They look like they're in this to make a quick buck. When, if that's the case, that's fine. But I do think it stands to reason as to why people just aren't vibing with them. In my heart of hearts, I truly would love to see Gearbox change these designs, because I think so far, an almost perfect reveal of Borderlands 4, where the only and given most laughable thing people can throw at it is that it looks like Borderlands 3, as if that's a bad thing, is these characters, right? It's like the only real negative people have seen from the trailer so far. And I really do think that if Gearbox is going to address this, the best way to do it, I think they could start with more definition. right? With their black lining on some of these characters. I definitely think that's the biggest issue right now, is that a lot of these characters look like they're made of clay. They don't really look real, so to speak. They look fake in an already fake world, and I think that's breaking people's immersion and breaking their perception. I also think that eventually, I'm gonna presume they'll do character-focused trailers. I think we'll like these characters a lot more, right? I think we'll get to know these characters a lot more once we get the character trailers like we did for Borderlands 3, and it shows off their backstory, it shows off their action skill. I think we're gonna warm to them a lot more. And, you know, granted, we didn't have that last time, and we were warmed to the BL3 Vault Hunters instantly way more than these ones. I do think that in this case, it might just be different. It might be a case that we are not gravitating towards these auraless characters, and we need to, right? And so I think it serves the function that we might be, you know, having to get to know them a little more later on, and that's going to change our perception. But who knows, it also just might not. My overall take on this drama is that if you're throwing a fit and assuming that these will change, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And if you are someone who is disappointed at the designs and hoping they change and you're going to play the game anyway, that's the right outlook to have. But ultimately, like with any video game and anything in life, if this is upsetting you to the point where you're getting legitimately angry and it's ruining your perception of everything else, then maybe it's best to pass up on Borderlands 4, maybe it's best to just sit this one out, because it's just not worth it at that point. But I'm going to be cautiously optimistic here. I do hope they'll make subtle improvements, and even if they don't, the reality is that I'm probably going to make a mod that fixes these in the future to make them have a little more aura, you know? Who knows? But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Please do keep it civil and give me your level-headed opinions on this. I don't want this to turn into Reddit. I don't want to see people arguing like a bunch of children. Give me your actual intellectual, high IQ thoughts on what you think of the situation and how Gearbox can maybe make some improvements, and let's start a legitimate good discourse here, a nice discussion that provides valuable feedback for the devs to take and then maybe implement. But without a doubt, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you want to get your hands on Borderlands breaking news when it drops first. And guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll check you in the next one.